Welcome back, everybody. I wanted to do a little background when we're thinking about the artists that we're selecting or talking about as our influences. So this obviously goes back quite a few years. This is a pretty early, fairly abstract painting of my own, which I did for a class assignment, I believe. And as I was working on this piece, the professor I was working with suggested to me that it reminded him of some of the abstractions of a couple of artists, most notably Henri Matisse and Richard Diebenkorn. So as I was studying and becoming more aware of my own interests as an artist, of course, I wanted to look into what these other artists were doing. So in this particular piece, I had left out a lot of major details. The chair that I was sitting in this self-portrait is not visible, and it really does seem somewhat similar to this painting by Matisse, in which his wife is seated in a chair that you really can't quite see. It focuses more on the figures and the color. I discovered as I continued that there were more and more times in my own work, whether it was slightly more realistic or slightly more abstract, that I would really find a connection between what I was interested in doing and the way that I wanted to apply color and to manipulate color in things that Matisse and Richard Diebenkorn both had done previously. So even the ones that are more abstract and have more large fields of color as we approach the 2000s, the more that I looked at the top image and the color scheme of that as a Matisse painting, the bottom two are paintings by Richard Diebenkorn. So these two artists have been with me as influences for a long time, and if you know the work of the other two, then you can really readily see their influence on what I'm doing. Here's a piece from the year 2000, which has a lot of intense red colors, and you can see that in the work of Matisse. You can also see it in one of the Bay Area figuratives that Richard Diebenkorn worked with, Nathan Oliveira. So I know just from past experience who my closest influences tend to be, at least in terms of painting. So I want you to think about not artists whom you necessarily imitate consciously, but artists who have some similar aesthetics, similar goals to what you're doing. Why are we talking about influences at all? Well, one of the reasons is that it really does help create a kind of shorthand message when you're talking to people in the art world and talking to other artists. Think of it this way. If you were meeting a group of people new to you, potential new friends for the first time, one of the first things that you probably talk about are some of your common interests. If you discover that a person has the same taste in terms of music, movies, books, other forms of entertainment, then you're more likely to get along. This is a more sophisticated way of thinking about that very issue. But if I can kind of name drop Diebenkorn, Oliveira, and Matisse, then the people that I'm talking to, without even seeing my work yet, have some idea in their heads about what it is that I'm trying to achieve in my own work. The other side of the coin, the other thing that I want us to think about is avoiding the trap of name dropping someone just because we think they're really interesting or we think their work is cool or we've heard their name and we know that other people are aware of them. A couple artists that I particularly admire but have no relationship to what I'm doing at all include the artists Robert Rauschenberg, whose work is very different from my own in an enormous number of ways. He uses a lot more found imagery. He's using silkscreen and collage. I absolutely love what he's doing, but my work doesn't look like this at all. So if I said that I was influenced by him, that would be kind of a false statement. Ai Weiwei is a contemporary artist who is massively influential for a lot of people. I'm not a sculptor. I don't do work like this. I am emotionally drawn to what he does because of its meaning and its political message. These are pieces of steel, of rebar, that were warped and broken in a massive earthquake in China. And Ai Weiwei and his team sourced these out of the rubble and re-straightened them as a statement about trying to make repairs and about the failure of the government to provide adequate safety precautions for people. It's a politically loaded piece that, again, doesn't really relate to what I do. So when you're thinking about your influences, it may not be as directly obvious as the relationship between this drawing of mine and this painting of Diebenkorn's that is a very similar composition. But you do want to avoid naming names just because they're famous or that they are people you legitimately really like if that work doesn't directly relate to your own.